Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week on MMA Junkie, we take you on a quick spin through the week's news. Joining me this week are Danny Segura, Gorgeous George, and Goes. And we've got plenty on the docket to talk about this week. So let's get straight into it. And the big news of the week came before the fights on Saturday when it emerged that perennial middleweight contender Yoel Romero has surprisingly been released by the UFC. Now, he's 43 years of age, but he's been there or thereabouts among the world's top 85ers. So to kick things off this week, guys, let us know where you think or what you think will be the next best move for the Soldier of God as he looks to continue his MMA career. We'll put 3 minutes on the clock to kick things off. And Danny, you can lead us off, my friend.
Before I give you guys my opinion on what should be next for Joel Romero, can we just stop the whole, he's 43 years old, he's ancient, he's not going to fight again. He's one of the best middleweights of the world today. Arguably, he defeated the champion back in March. I thought he beat him. Obviously, a very lackluster fight, but he probably had some of the biggest strikes in that fight. And then prior to that, he had a war with Paulo Costa, who's one of the youngest and most promising fighters in that division as well. And you can't forget about the Luke Rockhold knockout, as well as the wars with former champ Robert Whittaker. So I know he's old, but in MMA years, the mileage is very, very low. So Yoel Romero still has plenty of fight left in him. So let's put that to a side. Now, what's next? I'd love to see him in Bellator. I think that's a promotion where it makes a lot of sense for him. I think he spices things up in the middleweight division. Obviously, Gegard Mousasi there would be very interesting. Plus, we get him here in the States, so we still get some Joel Romero fireworks on Thursday night. So I'm all in for Joel Romero on a Bellator move.
What do you reckon, George? Is Bellator the natural play here? And as he said, he has still got plenty of miles on the clock, I think.
You would think so because they have the money, they have the pocketbook to sign a free agent like that. But I think they've learned from their past, and they seem to be building their youth. So, yeah, he's got the gas left in the tank. He's in great shape at 43. But I think, man, it comes down to he must have wanted too much money. I mean, he fought in March. Why did this take so long for him to be grouped into those 60 cuts? So it must have been a negotiation that didn't go well. Maybe he's difficult behind the scenes. Who knows? He's only fought 6 times in the last 4 years. He's had 4 bonuses, so he can deliver. But at the same time, there's times where, I don't know, I saw the other fight differently than Danny. I saw it as kind of a snoozer. I thought Izzy won. But look, to answer the question, PFL, if he can recharge and say, give us 5 fights in 1 year, $1 million and some change is yours, or just go to one championship. Maybe mix it up with Vitor Belfort over there.
Yeah, I think he's got options, Goes, and he's fought for the belt, whether it be an interim belt or the undisputed belt, 4 times. So he's an elite guy. So where is the best fit?
Well, let me just say, I'm glad I didn't have to go after Danny, because then I cannot roll my R's like that, gentleman. But Yoel's in an interesting situation because he gets paid a pretty good penny by the UFC. So really, wherever he goes, I have to imagine he's going to want that big contract. A lot of people point to Bellator, but I think Bellator has shown that they're kind of focused more on the homegrown talent. I think otherwise they would have maybe signed a guy like Fabricio Verdum. CPFL, the money they put out for Verdum and Clarissa Shields, I don't know if they're going to be willing to do that, guys. So for me, look at his management group, who he's represented. They did a great deal with Demetrius Johnson over at One Championship. I think that is probably the guys that we're looking for. But don't be shocked if you see him in BKFC.
Oh, my goodness. Yoel Romero in BKFC. Hold on to your hats. But moving things on, when quizzed about Romero's release during the post-fight press conference this weekend, UFC President Dana White revealed that, as George alluded to earlier, there are more cuts on the way, with the UFC set to release as many as 60 fighters, 60 in the remaining weeks of 2020. So what does this tell you about the way the UFC are moving as we head into 2021? And what do you think the driving force is behind all these cuts as they look to sort of clear the decks ahead of a new year? We'll put 3 more minutes on the clock for this one. And George, you can go first.
All right. Basically, I think what happened was the pandemic had them, they had to alter the way they did business. And I think they signed a lot of fighters that may have been one step away from the major leagues. But because they had, limited access to their international fighters early on, and at the same time, they had so many fighters falling out, I think they were able to look in the local scene and grab a few of them. And look, a few of them have fought for their spots, and they're going to hang on, and a few may not. But I think that's what happened. Between that and Dana White Contender Series, where we're averaging like 2, maybe even 3 per week, mean, that's 30 extra fighters right there. So, you know, at the end of the day, they just need to trim, I think, a little bit of that off. Plus, we kind of have gotten these roster purges like every so often, every few years. So I think they just accumulate and clutter, and it reaches its end point. So we'll see. Let's see what the names are. The bigger names may tell us that it may have been one of those deals where maybe too much money was being written out, too high checks were being written out for those guys. But otherwise, I think it's just roster clutter.
What do you reckon, Goes? And is Yoel Romero going to be the biggest name of those 60 that we're going to see depart the UFC, do you think?
Yeah, I think he probably will be the biggest name. And that's kind of, George alluded to it, that's what we have to look out for, right? Who are these names that are being cut? No way about it. 60 fighters. I mean, that just shows how competitive the sport is right now. George is right. A lot of it has to do with fighters that they had to bring in to fill spots for fighters that couldn't make it. And Dana White's Contender Series. For the longest time, we've been sitting there going, where are these guys going to go? And where they have to take somebody's spot, right? All that is starting to happen now. So I think the names are really going to be decent names. And the thing that stands out for me that kind of hurts guys in all this is, how about the timing? Is now really the right time to kind of put 60 fighters out there on blast and not let them know what their future could be? I think they could have waited a little bit on something like that. And I think that's something that probably didn't need to be put out there like that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, when is a good time to get let go? It's a tough one. Danny, what's your take on this?
I think it's a combination of things, but mainly we're seeing sort of that generational change, right? I think this is a time, especially with Dana White Contender Series, we're realizing that the next generation is here. The kids that were born in the late 90s, they're fighting and they're doing quite well and they're picking up great wins. And look, let's not forget, the UFC is a business and a very smart business. So they're making business decisions. They can maybe water down the product a little bit more by, cutting down some of the bigger names. So watering down the product a little more as far as the bigger names, but still get some of these new generation fighters in that may not be that well known, but in the long run, they will. We were just coming off the UFC Vegas 16 card. That card didn't have all that great name value, but look at how many great finishes it produced. So they're kind of realizing like, hey, this new generation is pretty good. Let's get more of that talent in there.
Yeah, maybe keep the big stars and build some new ones. It'll be interesting to see how they do things in 2021. One thing they're going to have to deal with is COVID-19. It's showing no signs of going away anytime soon. And the coronavirus hit the UFC pretty hard over the last few weeks. Positive tests forcing a host of bouts, including the main event at UFC on ESPN 18, to be scrapped. Now, given the increase in lost matchups and last-minute card changes, guys, what's your assessment of how the UFC are actually dealing with COVID right now and, the protocols that are currently in place? Do they need to be revisited and tweaked a little bit in order to keep fight cards intact and positive tests down? Or are they really doing all they can right now as they operate in the midst of a pandemic? We'll do 2 minutes on the clock for this one. And Ghost, you can go first.
Well, I think conversation is always good. I think you always have to try and reinvent things and just be communicating with each other. But I think the UFC's done a pretty good job right now. I mean, you look at all the other sports, the thing that's been the most successful is the bubble. But in mixed martial arts, and especially in the UFC, I mean, we're a year-round sport. I don't know that you could do something like that. And at the same time, you have to juggle having these fights and making them a true representation of what they should be. Yeah, maybe you can cut to one cornerman, right? That's less people that can be infected. But at the end of the day, those coaches are necessary. And you don't want to do things that are going to take away from getting a true representation of the fight. So right now, I think UFC is doing a great job, but keep that communication open.
Yeah, it's tricky, Danny, because obviously when they've been over to Fight Island, they seem to have really got it nailed over there. We're getting a few problems over in Vegas. Do you think that maybe things need to be tightened up in that particular area of the operation?
They do. They definitely do. And look, Dana White has said it before. I'm not planning ahead. I don't know what's going to happen in the next month. So we kind of have to just roll with the punches. And I think you have to include the protocol in there. There has to be some adjustments going along. No, hey, look, we had this at the beginning of the pandemic. This is what we're sticking with. No, there has to be some adjustments throughout, the course of this global pandemic. Now in Abu Dhabi, obviously, we got a great situation there as far as the number of cases in the U.S. Things aren't that great, so obviously that doesn't help. But they do have to tighten things up. We've seen in some embedded, and I think our editor Simon Samano pointed this out on Twitter, how they're getting through the fight week. They're supposed to be, once they're there, they're supposed to be good to go. But you see them go out, you see them training gyms around Vegas. So that needs to be tightened up if you want to keep it positive tests down and these fights falling through during fight week.
Yeah, George, really quickly, my friend, what's your 5-second take?
Stricter bubble. The NBA had no infections in like 3 months. They can't be letting anybody leave anymore. We follow them on social media, and we know they are leaving midway through. You just have to tighten that up.
Yeah, it is a tough one. You know, there are no perfect answers when it comes to this thing. So keeping an eye on everything that is happening with them and COVID going forward. Looking forward to Fight Island, of course, early in 2021. Now, one guy who actually benefited from all of the COVID upheaval over the last week or so was Marvin Vettori, who stepped in on short notice, put on a great performance to defeat Jack Hermansson in Saturday night's main event. Now, he's well and truly in the mix now at the top of that UFC middleweight division. But how far away do you think he is from a potential rematch with the last man to beat him, Israel Adesanya, for that UFC middleweight title? Book his next fight for us, guys, and plot that path for Vettori to get to a title shot at 185 pounds. We'll do 2 minutes on the clock. And Danny, you can lead us off.
Look, I think that Jack Hermansson victory was great, and it proved what he already knew and what he was trying to tell people. He's one of the elite at 185 pounds. I don't think a title shot should be next. I think Robert Whittaker has a name in that listing. I think he's number one on top of that list. But I would say Marvin Vettori is getting pretty close. I would like to see him against Paulo Costa, which was his original call out. I know he walked it back a little bit, but I think that fight makes all the sense in the world. And I think if he wins that one, then he'd be 5 fights in a row, 5 victories in a row. And I think then he would deserve a title shot. So I think Paulo Costa, that's the way to go.
Yeah, George, he was struggling for momentum, Marvin Vettori, but he's now got it. He's jumped in a short notice. He's got that momentum. What's next for him, do you think?
If he takes the Paulo Costa fight, it would be a huge skin on his wall if he could beat Costa. However, with what Robert Whittaker has done in the middleweight division, like a 10-1 overall record, former champion, title defense, everything, and coming off 2 wins since the loss of his title, man, I would not want to go head up against him in terms of my resume versus his resume and see who's next. I think Whittaker is still there. So what do? You take out Whittaker. You know, if Israel is going to fight Blachowicz, then that might leave that opening for Whittaker. That's kind of where I would head. I think you want to take him out.
What do you reckon, Goes? Do you agree with that?
I agree with it to a certain extent, but I don't think the UFC will give him that fight. I really think they liked that Paulo Costa call out. I think he's 1 fight away from getting that title shot, but there's so many things, so many outside factors. All it takes is an Israel Adesanya and John Jones Twitter beef to get reignited, and now we got to throw his name into the hat. So there's so many different things that need to happen here for that fight to actually get there. I would say take the fight with Paulo Costa, but get some kind of rest, because you can't go through Hermansson and Costa and not lose something. You know, those are going to be tough fights, but I think 2 wins like those will definitely prove he's ready for the champion.
Yeah, and it's good to see him back in the mix. He's had so many fights fall through over the last 18 months or so. So Marvin Vettori right back in the thick of it at 185 pounds. And to wrap things up this week, guys, one man who is looking to make a big impact in early 2021 is former UFC bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, who's getting ready to return from a 2-year USADA suspension after testing positive for EPO. Now, he wants to get straight back in there and fight for the belt first time out. But given the reasons for his absence, plus the strength of the UFC's bantamweight division right now, do you think the UFC should grant him his wish, or should he have to be made to fight someone else first? Let us know how you'd book the former champ when he's cleared to return to the cage at the end of January. And give us a final prediction. Will Dillashaw eventually get his hands on that UFC bantamweight strap again? 2 minutes to finish off, guys. And George, you go first.
Well, I'm going to apply the same logic from the last question to this question, because let's face it, it was fantastic. So this is what you do, is Corey Sandhagen's kind of in your way, because let's be clear about this. It's Sterling and Yan, once those two are ready to go. I don't think Dillashaw can wait for the winner of that one. And so he needs to fight Corey Sandhagen. Otherwise, if he takes another fight, then I think Sandhagen may just be ready to go. Or if Sandhagen beats somebody along the way, then Sandhagen may just have too much of that shine. He's young, he's exciting, good kid. I think the UFC likes him. So you want to take out that top cat if you're going to call for that type of a shot.
What do you reckon, Goes? Do you think Dillashaw's going to come back into that bantamweight division and just find his way back to the top again?
I think eventually he'll find his way up the top, but I don't really understand his logic of he just deserves to be that next guy. That doesn't really make much sense. But I do understand why he's asking for it. He's asking for it because the UFC has done crazy things like that in the past. So I don't hate him for doing that. But really, realistically, he doesn't want a tune-up fight, but I think we do need to know where exactly he's at. And the type of fight that I think can do that is maybe the winner of Font and Moraes, something like that. I could see that being great stylistically, a good fight. But I don't think his road is as long as other people's road.
It's a tough one, Danny. I mean, he looked like one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world before it all went wrong for him. So, I mean, how's he going to bounce back? And is he going to need to fight one or two guys first before he gets his shot at that belt again?
Look, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here on this show, but I have to call it how it is. Yes, he was a pound for pound great when he was active, but he admitted he was an EPO. He's also serving a 2-year suspension from USADA, and we know 2 years away from the sport is a long time, especially in his weight division. So I have my doubts. I am skeptic about how he would look in a return to mixed martial arts. However, we know that he is great, so he could very well find himself in another title shot. The fight that I'd like to see is Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar obviously looked great at 135, defeating Pedro Munoz. And look, he's a legend of the sport. At some point in time, we kind of did wonder, hey, what happens if he fought TJ Dillashaw? That'd be kind of interesting. So I'm all in for TJ Dillashaw making another run at the title. I don't think he should get the next shot yet. So fight Frankie Edgar, fight a legend, and start there.
Yeah, the bantamweight division absolutely stacked. Whoever he goes in there with next, it's going to be a huge fight. And that's all we got time for on this week's episode of Spinning Back Clique. A huge thank you to Danny Segura, to Gorgeous George, and to Goes, and to Kenny Hathaway for steering the ship behind the scenes. We have a packed slate of action this week. Bellator 254 on Thursday night, UFC 256 on Saturday night. And there's action from my neck of the woods. Cage Warriors are holding a triple header Thursday, Friday, Saturday from the York Hall in Bethnal Green, London. We will have coverage of all of the above on MMA Junkie this week. So keep it locked, and we'll catch up with you again next week.